Hi, welcome to Evidence for Faith. It's your host, Michael Lane. We are in the very end stages of our series on David and the giants. I mean, we've been studying David and the artifacts dealing with David. We've talked about slings. We've talked about the swords. We've talked about archaeological evidence of artifacts and things that we have seen showing that there's evidence of David and even of Goliath. We've talked about even some of the things like the Goliath shard and others in previous lessons. Now, in this lesson, we're coming into the last part. You see, the Bible is a very, very unique text, an ancient text. Yes, it is. But it is the inspired Word of God. That's one thing about this whole ministry, is evidence for faith. We're trying to show you and help people who are Christians to build up their faith and people who are skeptics to see that the Bible is true. And with this, we have our four pillars. The Bible itself is one, but we have the science pillar. We have a pillar of history and archaeology, and we have a pillar of logic. And through these, we've been looking at archaeology having to do with David, Goliath, and etc. And now the thing is looking with artifacts, there has never been a provable archaeological discovery that disproves the Bible. There is nothing like that has ever happened. Where, on the other hand, there's scores and scores, actually tens of thousands of discoveries have been found that support the Bible. And dealing with the Bible is containing science facts. Now, the Bible is not a science textbook. We all agree with that. That's no surprise. But the science facts that are found in the Bible are also true. We have a whole series, I hope you'll turn into that, a whole series dealing with the different branches of science, what is found in the Bible, and how the Bible is scientifically accurate. For years, for centuries, centuries, people, scientists would say that the Bible was a fraud, that there were all sorts of problems with the Bible. The thing is, if you give them enough time, what's come along, scientists have found out as they keep studying this, that the Bible has been correct over and over and over. And I don't believe there's one provable science error in the Bible. And that's what this whole other series we have. I hope you take a look at that. It's on our website. But going back to this one, as we've been studying David and the giants, in this series, we've read that the Bible, as I say, contains giants. There's stories of giants, multiple ones. King Og, Goliath, Goliath's brothers. We had the Nephilim. We've had the Anak, the Rephaim. We have a whole pile of stories on this. So the Bible is not unique, and though most people just sort of focus on Goliath, there are so many other giants that are mentioned. Now, the thing is, we've been studying these right out of the Word of God itself. And as I say, in this lesson, we're going to go outside the Word of God. We're going to look at history, recorded historians, respected historians, and see what they say. We're going to look at science. We're going to look at genetics. We're going to look at explorers. We're going to look at a lot of different things in this lesson to help you see it does fit with the biblical story. So outside sources do actually support the Bible on this. This is just fascinating stuff as we get into it. So there are giants that are mentioned in many, many other historical texts. For instance, in the works of Josephus, I'm going to give you a few here, just a few. We don't have if we were to do a whole comprehensive study here, we'd have to do a long series of several hours. We don't have time. In this series, we're trying to keep this short, but I'm going to give you as concise as I can, but give you enough information to make you to at least stimulate your mind to make you think, wow, this is true stuff. The works of Josephus, I have a couple of copies here, one very old one. The works of Josephus records many of the biblical accounts of giants. It's in there also. Now, Josephus was a first century historian, AD, and a lot of what he's written is constantly used in modern history for us to understand what took place in the past. So the works of Josephus is one source, historical source. Another one is the Book of Enoch. I have a copy here. You can buy these on Amazon. The Books of Enoch, actually it should be like plural because it's multiple books. And this is an amazing book. The thing is, it's non-inspired. What I mean by that, it's not God-inspired. God-inspired means it is the Word of God. It came directly from God, given to men to write down. The Book of Enoch is not like that. It's not. And it's not even written by Enoch of the Old Testament, because this book only dates back to about the 3rd century BC. So the books of Enoch were written between the Old Testament and the New Testament. But what's in here, and it's great literature, there's some history in this, but it's a fascinating book with chapters dealing with giants, with dealing with the heavenly realms, and apocalyptic visions. There's all sorts of stuff in here besides just history. Lots of chapters in dealing with the Nephilim and stuff. But remember, this is non-God inspired. So don't think this is what God said. It's a book sort of history and literature. It's an interesting book. Very interesting. Another source is called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest books that we have. It dates back to about 4,000 years. It weaves together myths and history and even philosophy. There's 12 ancient copies. You can see on our PowerPoint here, I'm showing you a slide of this. The Epic of Gilgamesh, there's 12 of these plates that have been found. And in this, it gives us the history of ancient Mesopotamia. And it contains, believe it or not, stories of giants. Giants that had extraordinary powers are mentioned in this. We use a lot of history from knowing about the past from the epics of Gilgamesh. Very, very frequently quoted. Another book, now pardon me if I really mispronounce this. I'm not Hindu, but there is an ancient Hindu text called the Mahabharata. Okay, this dates back to about 400 BC. It contains many stories of giants doing battles. So it's interesting. Obviously, it's not God-inspired. It's a Hindu text. But it is an interesting source that does mention giants. It's in there. Or take a look at this one. There's a book called The Histories. This one here is by the father of history, Herodotus. He was a Greek historian. This was written around 450 BC, to give you a time date. It too mentions races of giant men in the ancient world with great strength. This sort of parallels what we see right in the Bible. Or there's another book by the same title, The Histories, by Polybius. This was written about 100 BC. And you can get these books, by the way, right on Amazon. But Polybius, he lived around 100 BC, so before the time of Christ. He records, though, a lot of Roman wars and fightings. And in this, there are sections where he records that the Romans were fighting giants that had spears, giant spearmen. So that's another source. Or, staying in the same time frame, there's the commentaries by Julius Caesar. Interesting book, written around when Julius Caesar lived. That was around 50 BC. And in this, he's talking about the Gallic Wars and stuff. But in this, now, this was, to me, this was absolutely fascinating because he's describing tall, blonde, dangerous giants in Gaul, where he was fighting. I mean, he describes these. It's fascinating. Or I'll give you another book here. There's one called The Geography of Strabo, written by Posidonius. This is also written around 50 BC. It describes, basically up in Gaul, the German people, a whole race of them that were tall with yellow hair, and saying that they descended from the giant Celts, which lived more like over into England and to Ireland. And so we see this. Now remember, these are historians. These are people who are writing and recording history as it's happening. It's fascinating that these things have that. Here's another one that's very popular. The Life of the Noble Grecians and Romans by Plutarch. And he lived during the time of the apostles. So during the time of the New Testament being written, Plutarch actually writes about the Scythian giants who defeated some of these German giants that were mentioned by like Julius Caesar. Or there's another historical book, book of history here, The Epitome of Roman History by Florus, who lived during the time, again, of the apostles. And in this, he described German giant warriors of colossal height. And that's actually a quote, warriors of colossal height. I took that right out of the book. So we see again another source of history from a historian. Now, these are not, like I say, these are actual historians that we take and we write books of ancient history, world history, and stuff like this directly from a lot of these sources here. I'm not done. Here's another one. The History of the Empire from the Death of Marcus. Now, this is written by a guy by the name of Herodian of Antioch. Now, this is not Herod the Great, Herodian of Antioch. He lived around 170 to about 240 AD, and he wrote that Emperor Maximinus Thrax of the Roman Empire, that he was a colossal man, that he actually was around 8 to 9 feet tall. Actually, in this work, he describes that Thrax was a descendant, if you follow, like in the, say, a book on the emperors of Rome, if you follow this, that Thrax actually has in his ancestry Thracian Celts from up in the north of the people that the Romans had been fighting. But he was actually related to them, who were giants in themselves. And this is also backed up by the writings of another person, Aulus Cordus, who recorded also that Thrax was around, by our modern measurements here in the United States, about 8 foot 6 inches tall. He also describes that Thrax wore his wife's bracelet on his thumb as a ring. That's a pretty good sized hand to be able to do that. Maybe his wife, of course, his wife's wrist was probably smaller than mine. But anyway, what I've been showing you here is that most ancient cultures and these historians that we see across, that we have studied here actually describe giants also. And these are historians. Now, we're not talking mythology. This is talking about history. But if we get into mythologies of different ancient cultures and stuff, the myths about the gods, how many of those have we read? If you've read like the Odyssey or the many other works of the Greeks and the Romans, they come across giants, of course. Let's just talk about a few of these that, well, they all have giants in their background. And what's fascinating to me is these cultures, in some cases, developed centuries apart and even thousands of miles apart, but they still all contain stories of giants. Why is that? Is it based upon some historical accurate thing? And then they just added to their myths and stuff? For instance, the ancient Babylonians had prominent giants in their stories. One was, had a name, I believe his name was Hubaba. He was a guardian of the cedar forest in their mythology. Of course, like I said, I've already mentioned the Greeks and the Romans. The Greeks had, even remember the story, if you've read this, about the Titans who fought the gods? Titans. That's a word we even use today as a synonym for somebody who's a giant. And remember, the Romans absorbed the Greek culture with their religion, so they also had giants. When I was in middle school to just beginning high school, I was fascinated with the Vikings and the Norse people. And I remember reading, yes, I did. I even checked out of libraries books on ancient mythology of the Norse and studied them, having, of course, they were translated into English, but I was fascinated by these stories. And one of them had a character I still recall. His name was Jotner, and there's an entire race of giants that lived in the lands there with Norse mythology. If I'm not mistaken, some of these movies that we've had with Thor, I don't know if that Marvel comics and stuff like that, and if you recall, if you saw the movies, I only saw the first one. I can't really help you on this, but I believe in, because my grandkids watch these things, and I think they have told me that, that there's major giants and stuff, and that Thor and others battled these giants. There's giants in Norse mythology. And I've already mentioned the Celtic people. Well, the Celtic people, like I say now, the center part of the Celtic people, though they were in Northern Europe, they also were in Britain, and we normally associate them with the land of England and Ireland and such. But the Celtic nation contains many stories. If you go back and read, I remember having to read in college a book on, because I have a minor in history, and having to read certain books on Celtic religions and their ancient stories and stuff. And in these, there were stories of giants. Matter of fact, archaeologists have found artwork dealing with giants in the Celtic people, even though the Celtic people, many of them there were tribes of them, according to historians, that were or giants. But as I mentioned, they had certain giants that have been found in archaeology, and one that they have talked about, I do not remember the name, but there's one that actually has 3 faces. And I remember in reading this how similar it seemed to be to the in going to the Bible, the cherubim angels had multiple faces. This one did too. So that's in the Celtic. Sumerians, the ancient Sumerians, we have some of their history and their myth and religions, what they worship. They had stories of God, get this, interbreeding with human women and producing giants. Does that sound familiar to you? It should, because that was in some of our earlier studies that we've done in this series. Also, artwork of the Sumerians, we have found pictures indicating giants right there in certain artwork. Now, if you think, well, Michael, you're talking about ancient times and stuff, and you're talking about mythology. Yes, I am at this point. I mean, we talked about history. Now we talked about mythology. Let's get into sort of more modern history here. Not in the ancient times. Talking about the explorers. Now, when you're in middle school, in the United States anyway, you study a lot of times, like in history courses, and plus when you get into high school, you will do the same. You study the exploration of the New World. And in the exploration of the New World, there are stories dealing with giants. Now, they don't often have these in history textbooks of the United States, but if you go back and you study these people and their writings, you can find, if you go to a major university, you can get hold of these, or you can actually, with the internet, pull up some of this stuff today, too. For instance, the explorers, Vespucci, Francis Drake. Most of us know Francis Drake, the great Englishman. Whether depends on where you're from. He was either a pirate, like the Spanish thought of him, or the English thought he was a great admiral and explorer. Anyway, Coronado is another one. De Soto is another. Do you know that every single one of those that I've just mentioned wrote and logged about encountering giants on their journeys? True. Matter of fact, there's an excellent book you can purchase on this. It's called Giants, a reference guide of history, the Bible, and recorded legends by Charles Deloach. We have that here showing you an image of it. You can get it on Amazon. Or take a look at another one. I pulled up a lot of papers. I have spent almost a year studying, well, actually over a year studying this stuff, particularly for putting together this lesson. And this, took me over a year to put this all together and try and, okay, I'm going to put this in. I can't get into this. I don't have time. So let me just show you a few things, though. As we just mentioned, these explorers. Now, here's a copy of the Jerusalem Post. This is a February 4, 2024 article. And in this article, it's titled, Did Giant Humans Once Roam the United States? How about that? What's in this article, it talks about, don't have time to read it, but it talks about the Paiute Native Americans and their history and how they recorded, in the article, it's recording that these Paiute Indians had these giants, and these giants had, and this is going to be important, we're going to come back to this, they had red hair. And we have found some of their skeletons and stuff with red hair. We'll come back to that in a little bit. In fact, if you study Native American oral histories, well, I've just sort of touched on it here. Let's just spend a moment on this. One finds there are many, many stories of red-haired giants over twice the size of a normal person. And guess where these stories have these giants living? In North America, Central America, South America. Now, with that, let me give you a couple of other things that I have discovered with this. In Nevada, the state of Nevada, there is a very famous cave called the Lovelock's Cave. In the Lovelock's Cave, we have an image of it here showing you. It's very, very famous for many ancient artifacts of Native Americans that were found there, and also the remains of 10-foot giants with red hair. Yes, skulls with still red hair around like a hairdo still on them, yes. We were mentioning explorers. Let's go back to that with this because this ties into the exploration here. Ferdinand Magellan the person who first, his fleet circumnavigated the world, though he died in the Philippines. But he, in 1520, on his journey, he logged in his journals, this was being his journal, or his journeys being logged down, that he met a tribe of giant men nearly 10 feet tall in Patagonia. Now, Patagonia is what today we call Argentina and Chile, those countries. And also, some other explorers and people who were exploring the New World here. You had Pedro Sarmiento, Tom Hernandez, Anthony Kivet, and I think I'm pronouncing this Dutch explorer's name, Sebald de Wert, something like that. All these people logged that they claimed to have seen giants in South America. Fascinating, eh? Matter of fact, there's two other ones I might as well mention. In 1615, two more travelers. These were Jakob Le Marne and William Schouten. Also, I think they're Dutch explorers. Anyway, they recorded the fact that they had discovered a pair of human skeletons that were 9 feet in length. And they wrote about this. Or you're thinking, well, Michael, these are these explorers and stuff. Would you take the word of a famous British admiral, vice admiral? Well, at the time, he was Commodore. Commodore John Byron, we have his picture showing you here, of the Royal Navy. And he was sailing down along the coast of Argentina. He visited in 1740 the islands, the areas of Cabo Vergenes. That's just off Argentina. And in there, he officially logged down, he came across giants. That was in the year 1740. That's not that long ago. In DNA Consultants, genetic researcher Dr. Donald Yates published in October 13th, 2012, an article entitled Giants with Double-Rowed Teeth and Six Fingers. Now, in this, he also gave descriptions of many North American Indians and their stories of giants. They have stories going back where these giants in what is today the United States, they were living in Tennessee and in Texas. One story, as he was interviewing or reading, not interviewing, the person was dead, but studying back the ancient Americans, ancient Native Americans here, he comes across a story that was written down in 1857 by the story is by Chief Rolling Thunder, and this is in 1857, who stated, quote, innumerable moons ago, a race of white men 10 feet high were drove from their homes, end quote. That is something right here. 1857, a guy living there is talking about that his ancestors came across these giants. As I researched this, I found that fascinating. I found scores of documentation of Native American stories dealing with giant men, dealing with these giants. And now get this, they all seem to have red hair. Remember I told you about this before, that they had found some skulls with red hair in the New World and stuff? Came across this again, that there are many, many skulls that have been found, and some of them still have their hair. And these are giants that are people over 10 feet high. Now, surprisingly, I discovered from published DNA scientists that the Smithsonian Institute, and also the Carnegie Institute, but the Smithsonian Institute, that's a little hard to say for some reason, and a few other societies have obtained a lot of these ancient North American giants and South American giants. They have obtained them and they have locked them away. They do not display them, but they have them. For instance, if you think I'm making this up, let me give you something on this. This is from Archaeology World. Archaeology World. This is the March 14, 2023 publication. And an article here entitled New DNA Testing on 2,000-Year-Old Elongated Paracas Skulls Changes Known History. The Paracas Skulls. Now, this is actually was made famous, these skulls, in one of the latter Indiana Jones movies. I think it was called Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls or something like that. They're not crystal, they're bone. But in this article, they talk about, and I have a copy of the article here because I'm going to show you some fascinating pictures just to make sure that you're seeing. This is from, like I say, this is Archaeology World. They found these skulls. And many of these skulls, just showing you like a picture here, these skulls that you can see here, and there are others just looking on the cover here, you can see these pictures of skulls, and they studied these, and because the teeth are still there, you can get DNA from them, and they have studied these. Now, these skulls apparently date back from about 800 to 3,000 years ago. And as I say, they've extracted some of the DNA out of this, and in this article, this is fascinating. They have traced through the DNA, like people are today. You can do ancestry DNA, find out where your ancestors. They did this with the DNA from these skulls here, these elongated skulls. What they found out is they show ancestry going back to Mesopotamia. Yes, the biblical lands, Mesopotamia, specifically Syria of all places. That these people, these giants, these elongated skull people actually originated there. This is absolutely fascinating to me because this fits with the Bible so well. The scientists noted also that the elongations of the skulls is not due to human manipulation. Now, what do I mean by that? And what they talk about in here, in many cases, in the ancient, or not even ancient world, just even in modern times, certain cultures used to take skulls of infants and they would shape them. For instance, as I've told you in the past, I used to live in the Bahamas. I used to teach Bahamian history. And one thing I found interesting about the Lucayan Indians who live there is when an infant is born, when they get a child is born in the infancy, they had a special smooth type of wood that the mothers would manipulate on the skull, rotating and rolling the front part of the skull. Because as an infant, much of the bone here is not bone, it's cartilage. And it's in separate certain sections. Like you have the frontal bone, the bone here, you have the parietal, left and the right parietal bones, and then you have the occipital in the back, like on this one. But they would manipulate the shape of the skull, making a higher and sloped back forehead. They considered it, the Lucayan Indians considered this a beauty mark. And so these scientists, with these skulls that we're talking about here, these skulls did not have any sign of having manual manipulation to make these skulls long, elongated. As a matter of fact, one fascinating thing that they talk about in this paper is how these skulls are so different from other skulls. They have no mid-sagittal line in here. What I mean by that, let me show you. Again, using this skull here, this human skull, and as I look at this, as I told you, the bones, when you're born as an infant, the cranium, the whole human head, is not actually one solid mass. It's not like that. It is actually separate bones that then, as you grow older, throughout adolescence, they fuse together. And because of that, the fusion marks are not straight lines, but they're like a saw pattern that come together, and you can see where the frontal bone actually joined and fused into the cranium. And then you have the parietals. You have the left parietal bone here, the right parietal bone here, and you can see this mid-sagittal, just meaning the mid section here, the midline going down here, and you can see the sagittal line. And if I'm hoping you can see this line that's here, and we all have this, and it goes down to the occipital bone that comes back here. We all Homo sapiens, all humans, we have this, okay? What's fascinating is these human elongated skulls do not show that pattern. They do not have the mid-sagittal line on there. How do you explain that? I have no idea. To be totally honest, I have no idea. Outside of it's got to be a genetic thing. I have no way of telling you how that happened. These are human people. Also, what's fascinating about them is they have red hair. You can see The red hair on this skull that I'm showing you here, and we also have an image here showing you, you can see red hair on this thing, samples of red hair on these elongated skulls. Now, the scientists here in this article, they went so far even to hypothesize that what they were holding were actually skulls related to the Nephilim of the Bible. How's that grab you? Isn't that cool? Yes, that they actually makes this actual connection here, because it seems to make some type of sense from where they're found and stuff. Let me tell you about another article that's worth noting. Again, this is from Archaeology World Team. This is the March 31st, 2020. A copy of the article, The Mystery Behind the 18 Giant Skeletons Found in the USA. Now, this one I put in here because of where they found these. I don't know if you're aware, because we have people who listen from over 80 countries all over the world. We are here in the United States. Our studio is right here where we're at, is in southeastern Wisconsin. This pertains to this area because in a dig overseen, this is right out of this article, I'm just going to tell you facts from the article, in a dig that was done near Lake Delavan, that's not even, I think, an hour's drive from where I'm standing. Now, this dig took place in 1912. They recovered 18 9-foot-long skeletons with huge elongated heads. Wow. The same type of thing that they're finding in South America, they're finding just an hour's drive here in Wisconsin. They have found these things. The author of the article goes on to write, quote, giants, we're talking about the skeletons here, giants have been found on a regular basis throughout the Midwestern states for more than 100 years. Giants have been found, we're talking about the skeletons again, and giants have been found in Minnesota, in Iowa, in Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, and New York. Whoa. So where's the skeletons? Dealings with the Smithsonian Institute. They have taken these skeletons that were found in 1912 and they have locked them up. And a couple of other organizations similar to the Smithsonian have locked them up. And as to this person who is writing, he says, yes, they were all locked up. Matter of fact, they even in this article quote the late Professor Dr. Vine Deloria, former executive director of the National Congress of American Indians. He was a law professor also at several prestigious universities, UCLA, University of Arizona, etc. I'm going to read part of the article here that's quote. I'm going to just quote the thing right out of here. What Dr. Deloria actually talks about his idea about why the Smithsonian and other organizations are doing this. He says, modern day archaeology and anthropology have nearly sealed the door on our imaginations, creating a one-way vault virtually sealed off to anyone but government officials. Now, end quote. What he's basically doing is this long quote goes on, but he's accusing the Smithsonian Institute of deliberately hiding these bones, these elongated skulls, etc., to pave a one-way path through human anthropology that corresponds to their liking and not to history. As a matter of fact, we see this off the top of my head. I'm just going to tell you, we see this constantly in many zoos that will take like replica skeletons of Lucy and other pre-human ape-like creatures, and they just express this trying to show you a line how human evolution occurs. There's this one-way path. The Smithsonian is doing the same thing with these giants. Give you another article here. The Jerusalem Post, we've talked about them before. An article, Did Humans Once Roam the United States? In this, it states, quote, unusual human remains found in Nevada believed to belong to a tribe of giants that settled in the U.S. fought against Native Americans, end quote. It also includes this statement. Remember, this is Jerusalem Post. Quote, even though these giants may sound like products of a fertile imagination, It is difficult to ignore this finding and not consider that perhaps the Paiute know more than we thought, end quote. In other words, he's saying in this article, they're talking about that the Paiute Indians, if you recall, because we mentioned this article before, how the Paiute Indians knew about and talked about these giants and stuff, and this is being described here, that maybe they knew a lot more about giants than we know today. It's not imagination. There is evidence to support this. Let me give you another one. This is another source from prestigious Ulster Medical Society, and they publish in their medical journal. Now, this is just in November of 2010. This article here, and you're seeing a blow-up of it right now, titled Giants of the British Isles. Now, in this article, after citing a history of giants in the ancient world, it says this, I'm going to quote, and pardon me if I mess up the pronunciation of some certain places. Quote, the annual register of Cornwall for 1761 documents that the tin mine at Tregonier on the Fall had a stone coffin 11 feet 3 inches long containing a skeleton of a man estimated at 10 feet. Clearly, giants migrated as far as the British Isles fairly early in history. And again, I apologize if I didn't pronounce the British area there, Tregony, correctly. But they're talking about these giants. This is in 1761. And I love how it states in this article, clearly giants migrated as far as the British Isles. But the point is, this is coming from a modern, respected medical journal that is stating this. Now, let me just go on and just, as we're running out of time here, some will try to explain these tales that we've talked about as being individuals with these giants as being people, just ordinary people that suffered from a disease. Acromegaly is one of them. Gigantism is another one. These are diseases that you do find even to this day. These are diseases that result in people being taller. But if you go back and you study these, and I had to teach these when I actually taught human genetics, both of these conditions, though they produce similar results, giants, or tall people, I should just say, we'll just say tall people, there's certain differences to them. Gigantism occurs in children and is the result of, in childhood, before adolescence, of an overproduction of growth hormone when the child is just growing naturally. And that's what makes them get taller. They don't become super tall giants, they just get taller. I know a couple of people, I have a couple of friends that have this, but it is very rare for this to happen, which I'm sort of happy about that. You see, we've been learning a lot about giants and stuff, and that is one type. But the other disease that we are mentioning here is acromegaly. It affects not children in infancy, this affects middle-aged adults. It also results in people being tall. And it's also from an overproduction of human growth hormone. Though the cause of this is almost always, it can be traced to a gene mutation, that forms a pituitary tumor, or it's just a point mutation in genetics, in the DNA. But according to the National Organization for Rare Disorders, I told you these are rare. Now, according to this prestigious organization, they state this is a very, very rare condition. Both of these, very rare for this to happen. It only happens in about 60 out of 1 million people. This is rare for this to happen. Even so, some of these people who have this disease, they do get tall. In fact, the Ulster, I pulled out an article from their journals. The Ulster Medical Society published an article in their journal. This is from March 12, 2014. This is a fascinating article. The hereditary gigantism, the biblical giant Goliath and his brothers. How about this? A medical journal actually having an article about Goliath and why he's tall. That's what this is. Now, in this article, Donnelly and Morrison, the authors, acknowledge what hit me first. is this medical journal is acknowledging, these people are acknowledging Goliath is a real person. Why not? We've seen, like with our other videos, we've seen so much evidence that Goliath was real. But they attribute his height to a hereditary pituitary condition caused by a faulty gene. That's what this is actually talking about. But also what's interesting is you look at the image of this on the screen, you can see that there's actually a pedigree for the Goliath family, showing some mark of heredity. Even so, people who have the condition that they're talking about here, they don't become these major giants that we talked about before. I mean, Goliath was tall. Yes, this is scientific evidence that this could happen. That Goliath could have had this condition and stuff, and maybe it was passed down through different generations of people who were giants and from the Nephilim, the Anak, etc., etc. We don't know that. None of the genetics was written in ancient time, but we do know that this is a possible solution for this that we read about in the Bible. But remember this, and this is why I have a little problem thinking that this explains the whole giant thing. I don't think this does, because both these diseases that I mentioned are extremely rare, and they don't make entire races. Apparently, through what we see in history, there are races of giants. Now, the Bible would talk about how the Nephilim came, and in our first series on this, and talked about how the Nephilim came, where they came from, fallen angels mating with women, and it produced eventually, throughout the other lessons, we talked about the Rephaim and the Anak, the sons of Anak, that there seems to be some hereditary thing. This paper supports that type of an idea. But what they're talking about here and explaining it is a very rare condition. I'm not sure that would be a feasible solution for this whole thing, that it's just natural, a natural mutation. I believe it goes back to what the Bible tells us, that giantisms like this, the giants, the Nephilim and stuff, were actually caused by angels, fallen angels mating with women and producing these very extraordinary, super strong giants that we've mentioned in our lessons before. So, wow, we have covered a lot in this whole series. I mean, a whole lot of things. And I'll tell you, we haven't even touched on much of the information dealing with giants. Like I say, I've been spending over a year working on this, and there's so many papers and such. I haven't got time to go through it all with you. It could be a college semester class. There's so much information here. So we barely touched on it. But even so, I've given you today evidence that these giants have existed. We know there's through evidence that Goliath existed. But there is so much evidence that giants, as the Bible records, there were giants. And we see this. The biblical record is actually supported by modern science and even genetics, history, and archaeology. We see it. And these are parts of our pillars of our ministry that have added to the support that the Bible is true. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If this video series or this video alone has intrigued you, we'd love to hear about it if you have questions or whatever. But also, if it's really helped you, maybe in your faith, to understand the Word of God is true, we would love to hear from you on that also. And if it has impacted you, and you are a born-again Christian, if the Holy Spirit puts it upon your heart to help support our ministry, we could really use that. Whether a one-time gift. We just received the other day a $2,000 one-time gift from a person. Came at a very, very good time because a microphone went out. We had to buy a whole new microphone, and this covered the cost for that. So we're very thankful for that type of thing. And there's other things. So a one-time gift helps us out tremendously. If you could be a monthly supporter, we could really use that also. But that's upon you. At least we would ask you pray for evidence for faith. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me. And this concludes this series. Please tune in and look at some of the other series that we have. And we have more that we plan to do. So until then, take care and may God bless.